Hi, this is Charlie Hoolihan with Pelican Athletic Club. I'm here today to speak about glute function, hip muscle function to benefit runners and walkers, specifically athletes too at the same time. Glute function is an orthokinetic joint and muscle process, an athletic, and also, as we all know, an aesthetic process. And what we try to do with our clients is depending upon what their goals are, we would like to see them exercise in many planes of motion, sagittal, straight ahead, frontal, side to side, and transverse rotation. Hip function is important in all of these, and what we want to do here today is just show you the sagittal plane and how it applies to running. And we're going to run through a few exercises that will help with development of good running skills. There's really no sport-specific type of training. There is sport-similar type of training, and what we do is we try to set up our athletes and clients to be able to do a sequence of exercises, relate the exercise to the movement we're looking for, and then we're going to perform the exercises and then perform the movement that we're looking for them to perform to use these muscles. So without further ado, we'll go into another room and we'll go through about 5 exercises, and we'll come back in here and do another 5 exercises. Hi, we're going to do 2 exercises here. First of all, we're going to go with the hip thrust and then a single leg hip thrust. And the idea of both exercises is to give a very clear feeling of what the glutes are actually doing when in movement. Fred's going to back away from us now. We're going to go through the motion. I'll show you both of these motions, and then we're going to come back in and just explain it just for a second. Okay, here's the hip thrust. We'll lift through here, come back down, firing through, making sure both glutes are firing equilaterally. And secondly, you can do the single leg hip thrust, firing up through here and back down, making sure that the hips are in a straight parallel line in full extension, the hip and abdominal region. And you would alternate the sequence of reps on both sides. Okay, bring it on in. And the idea here with both of these motions, again, is to stimulate hip function through the glutes and to make your clients feel that you're getting a good push from the backside. Because when we talk about running, we're going to talk about backside mechanics and the push through. Next, we're going to do the much misunderstood hip extension, and we're going to talk about that and as it relates to glute function. Here we are at the wonderful hip extension, and again, as I said earlier, it's kind of a misnomer to call this exercise the back extension. It's often explained as, which is true. You are extending your back and forth, but I think the primary emphasis needs to be made on the hips itself. As Fred backs away, we're going to talk a little bit about how it should be looking. Heels back against your plate here, all the way through. First thing you do with a client or an athlete is you train them to feel this motion. Feel the hips or the glutes being fired, the hamstrings being fired, calves, and also through the big toe. And the idea is to make them relate every single part of the lower body to the specific movement that we're doing. I'm contracting my glutes to hold myself up, and then as I lower myself down, those glutes are relaxing. As I contract again, that's when we get the raising of the hip, the extending of the hip. The idea here is to make sure that people don't confuse this with a back motion, hence the misnomer of back extension and hip extension. We're going to move on to 2 other exercises with machines just to kind of re-emphasize this. By the time they have reached those 2 exercises, they'll have really got a good awareness of what their glutes are doing. Here we are at one of the glute machines. We're going to do 2 of them. I want to just kind of go through the technique for both of them. The idea is to, when you're doing any of these glute machines, depending upon how you're setting it up, you want your spine to be upright, you want your legs to be upright, and you want to be in a position where you are firing from the glutes primarily. We need to separate out the glutes to a certain extent with these exercises so that you get a full contraction from the glutes without dominance from the hamstring or the back. And this tends to happen on these exercises. This exercise we're going to do a little bit differently from the typical motion, which comes down here with some support on the chest. Here we're going to relate it more to running by allowing this one leg to support while the other one is going through the motion. Firing through the glute, the idea is to make sure that you have an upright position. The weight should allow you to be able to fire all the way back into the glute. We don't want a lot of gyration and motion here. Okay? That takes out the primary function of this exercise as it relates to athletic performance. All right, multi-hip machine we're all kind of familiar with. Same principles we talked about with the single leg glute machine over there. The idea here is to get into position, follow through, make sure you're following through from your knee all the way into the hip, all the way through. There's got to be some primary glute activity. Again, the tendency is to load up most of these machines and get a lot of gyration, a lot of activity from the back, and a lot of activity from the hamstrings. We're looking for a sprinter-like motion. There's a reason why sprinters have main large glutes as compared to endurance athletes. All right, we're running a little short on time here for the 5-minute video, but I wanted to go quickly through some aspects of band resistance running and band resistance stuff. We would primarily use it with a partner using these bands here, where you can do a partner to hold you back, and that way, from a time efficiency standpoint, with large groups, you can do it. What you want to do, though, with the band resistance is make them come in and feel all aspects of the running mechanics. Okay, so I'm being band resisted. As I do this, I feel the posterior chain from the big toe, foot, all the way up through the hamstrings and the glutes. I feel that. So we get them to walk and march, essentially like I just showed you. Here, then you'd have them do a skip, just to be able to tie that in, feel the mechanics there, from the big toe all the way to the glutes. And then ask them to do a skip for distance. How far can you skip? How far can you do? Using the firing from the cannons, which we nickname the glutes. From the bands or the resistance training from the pulling backwards, you can take people out and push something, whether it's a prowler or a small pickup truck or a small smart car. You can get them to push and do very deliberate motions where you're pushing, good hip extension, following through as you're doing it. You've got to relate the mechanics first before you get into the actual running phases and movement mechanics. After this, boom, they'd head outside and run 200 to 400 yards to be able to finalize all of the things we did. And we can do multiple circuits and to be able to relate what's happening with the back half to the actual movement of forward motion.